There's a pattern I've observed over decades of clinical practice that nobody wants to talk about. A transformation so subtle, so systematic, that most men don't even realize it's happening until they've completely forgotten who they used to be. You see it everywhere. Intelligent, capable men who once navigated complex challenges with confidence, now seeking permission for decisions they should make themselves. And here's what terrifies me most. This isn't happening by accident. What I'm about to share with you isn't just about marriage. It's about understanding the psychological machinery that can systematically dismantle your autonomy, your identity, and your sense of purpose. This matters because you can't defend against what you don't understand. The ancient Stoics taught us that the unexamined life isn't worth living. And I would add, the unexamined relationship can cost you everything you are. Over the next several minutes, I'll walk you through the precise mechanisms, backed by psychological research and clinical observation, that explain how strong men become shadows of themselves. But more importantly, I'll show you how to recognize these patterns before they take root, and what you can do to maintain your integrity within a relationship structure. But before we dissect the machinery, you need to understand something fundamental about human psychology that most relationship advice completely ignores. Let me tell you about a client I had. Brilliant engineer, built systems that process millions of transactions daily, who called me in crisis because he couldn't figure out how he'd lost the ability to choose his own clothes. How does that happen? How does a man who makes critical decisions affecting thousands of people become paralyzed by the simple act of getting dressed? The promise is beautiful, isn't it? Two individuals coming together as equals, combining their strengths to face life's challenges. The marketing is nearly perfect, but there's a psychological bait and switch happening here that we need to examine with brutal honesty. Partnership implies decision-making equality, but watch carefully what happens in practice. It starts innocently. You're better with money, why don't you handle the budget? Then, you're more social, you should manage our calendar. These seem like practical divisions of labor, and they are, but they're also the beginning of an authority concentration pattern that you need to recognize. Pay attention to the linguistic framework. Our money, but she allocates it. Our house, but she decorates it. Our social life, but she schedules it. The possessive pronoun creates an illusion of shared power while masking unilateral control. This is what psychologists call participatory oppression. You feel involved while your actual agency diminishes week by week, month by month. The genius of this system is its gradual implementation. No single change seems unreasonable. Can you check with me before making plans? That sounds like consideration. Let's discuss major purchases together. That sounds like financial prudence. But string together 50 such reasonable requests, and you've constructed a comprehensive approval system that governs your entire life. Here's what you need to understand. You're not weak for falling into this pattern. You're human. Your brain is wired to seek approval from those you love. The question isn't whether you're susceptible. It's whether you're aware enough to maintain boundaries even when boundary keeping feels unloving. And that's the trap, you see. They've made your autonomy feel like a betrayal. The Stoics distinguish between what's in your control and what isn't. When you systematically outsource your decision-making authority, you're voluntarily placing your happiness under external control. Marcus Aurelius would have recognized this as a fundamental violation of philosophical wisdom. You cannot be free when someone else holds the keys to your choices. But the partnership myth is just the entry point. The real transformation happens through something far more insidious. A financial architecture that turns your earning power into someone else's spending authority. Now pay very close attention to this, because it explains why so many men feel trapped even when they're the primary earners. It's a paradox that shouldn't exist, but it does, systematically. Financial merger isn't partnership when it disconnects your effort from your agency. You work harder, earn more, but have less control over how resources deploy. This creates a psychological state called learned helplessness. The same phenomenon researchers observe in laboratory animals who've learned that their actions don't affect outcomes. Joint finances sound fair until you examine the decision-making patterns. Who decides on furniture? Who determines vacation destinations? Who sets the lifestyle standard? If you're earning it but not choosing it, you're not in a partnership. You're in an employment arrangement where you've somehow become both the worker and the one without benefits. The language shifts from our money to your responsibility. We need to save for the house, but she chooses the neighborhood. You need to provide security, but she defines what security means. You're given responsibility without authority. That's the classic formula for chronic stress, for burnout, for the slow erosion of your sense of self-worth. Here's the devastating question you need to ask yourself. Whose dream are you building? If you're working to fund a vision you didn't create, in a house you didn't choose, maintaining standards you never set, you're not building your life. You're financing someone else's. And understanding this pattern doesn't make you ungrateful or selfish. It makes you aware. And awareness is the prerequisite for any kind of meaningful change. But the financial architecture alone can't complete the transformation. That requires something more personal, more isolating. If you've noticed your friendships fading, if Friday nights with your friends have become monthly check-ins, if you feel guilty for wanting time away, this is not accidental. This is engineered isolation, and it serves a specific purpose in the machinery of transformation. Male friendships aren't competition to marriage. They're oxygen for masculine identity. But watch how systematically they get reframed as childish, wasteful, or threatening to marital unity. Wouldn't you rather spend time with me? This creates a binary that shouldn't exist. Loving your wife and maintaining friendships aren't mutually exclusive unless someone makes them mutually exclusive. Your friends are immature. You act different around them. These criticisms do two things simultaneously. They devalue your social network, and they suggest your authentic self is problematic. Both are control mechanisms designed to keep you isolated and dependent. Without external perspectives, you lose reference points. Without friends who remember your pre-relationship self, you lose connection to your authentic identity. Without independent social support, you become emotionally dependent on the very person restricting your freedom. Can you see the trap? Can you see how elegantly it's constructed? Seneca warned about voluntary servitude, how we forge our own chains by accepting, step by step, restrictions that we'd reject wholesale if presented all at once. Your social network is the external mirror that helps you see when you're compromising too much. Remove that mirror, and you lose the ability to recognize how far you've drifted from who you really are. And once isolation is complete, the reshaping accelerates through a process I call revision by 1,000 improvements. Here's a question that should trouble you. When was the last time your natural preferences were simply accepted? Not improved upon, not optimized, not gently corrected, just accepted as legitimate expressions of who you are? This isn't explosive conflict. It's water carving through stone. You should dress better. You need to eat healthier. You watch too much sports. You're not ambitious enough. You should call your mother more. You spend too much on hobbies. Individually, these sound helpful. Collectively, they communicate a devastating message. Who you are naturally is insufficient. The brilliance of low-level criticism is its perfect deniability. Confront it, and it transforms instantly. I'm just trying to help you be your best self. Don't you want to improve? Now you're in an impossible position. You're defending your right to exist as you are while simultaneously feeling guilty for resisting so-called help. Constant correction creates a psychological state where you stop trusting your own judgment. Should you buy this shirt? Is it okay to have drinks after work? Can you sleep in Saturday? Your internal compass gets replaced by an external approval system that never quite grants you permission to exist comfortably in your own skin. Here's the trap you need to recognize. You start seeking approval for increasingly basic decisions. Not because you lack judgment, but because resistance has become more psychologically expensive than compliance. Your brain learns that peace comes from permission, not from following your own counsel, and that's a terrible lesson to internalize. Epictetus taught that we should examine our impressions before accepting them. When someone criticizes your choices, pause and ask, is this true? Is this helpful? Or is this an attempt to control disguised as care? Not all feedback deserves internalization. Not all criticism comes from a place of genuine concern. But criticism alone can't complete the transformation. That requires systematically eliminating everything that makes you feel alive. Watch what happens to men's hobbies after marriage. Music becomes noise. Video games become childish. Sports become pointless. This isn't random. This is systematic devaluation of anything that doesn't serve utilitarian purposes that benefit the household. Every activity gets filtered through utilitarian logic. Does it generate income? Does it improve the home? Does it advance social status? If not, it's wasteful. But here's what that framework misses entirely. Human beings need non-utilitarian pursuits to maintain psychological health. We need activities that serve no purpose except bringing us alive. Your wasting time becomes the ultimate criticism. But what exactly are you wasting? Time not spent being useful is framed as irresponsible. This creates guilt around joy. That's a devastating psychological burden that no human being should have to carry. Your guitar wasn't just a hobby, it was a connection to who you are. Your weekend basketball games weren't just exercise. They were community and flow states and connection to your body and your competitive spirit. When these disappear, you don't just lose activities. You lose access to parts of yourself that make you whole. As authentic passions disappear, a new identity emerges, the useful man. You derive meaning from being helpful rather than from being yourself. You measure worth through service rather than satisfaction. This replacement identity feels like maturity, but it's actually surrender dressed up in respectable clothing. Here's what I want you to understand. Pursuing activities solely for joy isn't selfish, it's essential. The Stoics called this living in accordance with nature. You are a human being, not a human doing. Your worth isn't reducible to your utility to others. You have intrinsic value simply by virtue of being conscious and alive. Imagine reclaiming 1 hour per week for something that serves no purpose except bringing you alive. That's not irresponsible. That's self-preservation. Your capacity to serve others actually increases when you maintain connection to your authentic self. You can't pour from an empty cup, as they say, and you've been running on empty for far too long. And here's where it gets truly insidious. You begin helping build your own cage, providing the very justifications for your own captivity. The most brilliant aspect of this system, you'll eventually defend it. You'll explain why giving up your hobbies was mature, why losing your friends was inevitable, why surrendering your autonomy was growth. This is called cognitive dissonance management, and it's devastatingly effective at keeping you trapped. When you've sacrificed significantly for something, your brain has two options. Admit the sacrifice was unjustified, which is painful, or revalue what was sacrificed, which is protective. Most people choose the protective path. They convince themselves that what they lost wasn't valuable anyway. It's a psychological defense mechanism, but it keeps you imprisoned. Happy wife, happy life. Marriage is about compromise. Real men put family first. Notice how these phrases frame one-sided sacrifice as wisdom. You adopt the language of your diminishment as your own philosophy. You become the enthusiastic advocate for your own transformation into something lesser than you were. I've grown up becomes code for I've surrendered. I'm more responsible now means I no longer pursue what makes me feel alive. The transformation gets reframed as evolution rather than reduction, growth rather than shrinkage. But you know in your heart what's really happening. All married men go through this. This normalizes an abnormal situation. You look around, see other men in similar situations, and conclude this is inevitable. But you're comparing your cage to other cages and concluding that cages are just how life works. That's a failure of imagination and courage. Here's the truth that can liberate you. You can acknowledge that you've participated in your own domestication without shame. Understanding how it happened is the first step toward reversing it. Self-awareness isn't self-blame. It's self-empowerment. It's the beginning of reclaiming what you've lost. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. You can't change the past, but you can change how you respond to recognizing these patterns in your present life." So if this transformation is so systematic, so comprehensive, is escape even possible? Can you reclaim your authentic self without losing everything you've built? That's the question that matters most. Awakening usually comes through crisis. A health scare forces reflection. A career setback reveals dependence. Or simply the accumulated weight of years of suppressed authenticity becomes unbearable. You look in the mirror and don't recognize the person staring back. That's the moment of truth. The first step isn't action, it's brutal honesty. You need to acknowledge the transformation without the comfortable rationalizations that make it bearable. This requires confronting how much has been lost, how much has been surrendered, and how the person you've become serves others' needs rather than your own. Notice your chronic anxiety. Notice how you're constantly monitoring for approval. Notice how exhausting it is to be you right now. These aren't personality flaws. These are symptoms of living inauthentically, of betraying yourself day after day in small ways that add up to a complete abandonment of self. When was the last time you felt fully alive? When did you last pursue something solely because it brought you joy? If you can't answer these questions easily, that's diagnostic information. That tells you something important about how far you've drifted from your authentic center. Here's the crucial distinction. Are you choosing your actions or are you performing your role? There's a profound difference between a man who chooses to serve others and a man who exists only to serve others. One is generous, the other is trapped. Recognition is painful, but it's also empowering. You can't address what you won't acknowledge. The Stoics understood that clear perception of reality is the foundation for wise action. You're not powerless. You've been operating without full awareness. That changes right now, in this moment. Right now, today, write down 3 things you used to do that made you feel alive. Not things you should do or productive things. Things that genuinely brought you joy. Just write them down. That's your first act of reclamation. That's you beginning to remember who you are beneath all the roles you've been playing. But recognition alone isn't enough. You need a practical framework for reclaiming your agency step by step. Transformation doesn't require dramatic confrontation. It requires systematic boundary restoration, starting small and building capacity. Think of it as strength training for your authentic self. You don't start by deadlifting 400 pounds. You start with the bar and add weight gradually. Start making small decisions without consultation, not major financial commitments, just everyday choices. Order what you actually want at restaurants without checking first. Buy the shirt you like, choose the movie, accept the invitation to see your friend. These seem trivial, but they're not. Your brain needs to relearn that you can make decisions independently without catastrophic consequences. Each small assertion of preference is evidence that the world doesn't collapse when you act autonomously. You're gathering data that contradicts the learned helplessness you've developed. The resistance you'll face will sound like this. You never consult me. You're being selfish. I thought we made decisions together. These are tests. Your response needs to be clear and calm. I can make this decision myself while still valuing your input on important matters. Not everything needs committee approval. The Stoic principle here is distinguishing between significant decisions requiring collaboration and everyday choices that don't. You don't need permission to exist, to have preferences, to make basic choices about your own life. Reconnect with one old friend this week, not in a dramatic way. Just reach out. Hey, it's been too long. Want to grab coffee? That simple act is revolutionary when you've been isolated for years. External relationships provide perspective and remind you who you are beyond your utility. Male friendships offer something irreplaceable. You see your authentic self reflected in how your friends interact with you. They remember who you were before the transformation. They can help you find your way back. The resistance you'll face. Why do you need to see him? I thought we were spending time together. Your response. Maintaining friendships makes me a better partner. I'm not choosing them over you. I'm choosing wholeness over fragmentation. I'm choosing health over sickness. Imagine how it will feel to laugh freely, to discuss topics you actually care about, to exist without monitoring approval constantly. That feeling is available to you. It's not selfish to want it. It's human. It's healthy. It's necessary. Dedicate 1 hour per week to something non-utilitarian that brings you alive. Music, sports, gaming, reading, hiking, whatever feeds your soul. Non-negotiable, no guilt, no justification required beyond, I'm a human being, not a utility machine. These strategies work, but they require something most men struggle with. The willingness to face discomfort in service of authenticity. The willingness to be called selfish when you're simply being human. Here's what I want you to understand. The goal isn't to become selfish or inconsiderate. The goal is to transform relationships based on your utility into relationships based on your humanity. There's a profound difference between those two foundations. True partnership requires two whole people choosing to collaborate, not one person absorbing the other. You can maintain relationships while refusing to be reduced to a resource. You can love someone without erasing yourself. You need to talk about how you talk, not in the heat of conflict, but in a calm moment. I've noticed a pattern where I seek approval for basic decisions. I don't think that's healthy for either of us. I want to maintain our connection while also maintaining my autonomy. This is vulnerable honesty, not accusation. You're not blaming. You're identifying a dynamic that serves neither of you well. A healthy partner will hear this and be curious about your experience. A partner invested in control will respond defensively. Pay attention to the response. Does your partner become curious about your experience or defensive about perceived criticism? The response tells you whether you're dealing with someone interested in partnership or someone invested in management. That's crucial information. Establish this principle clearly. I respect your autonomy to make decisions in your domain. I expect the same respect for mine. On shared decisions, we collaborate. On personal decisions, we inform but don't seek permission. This isn't radical, it's baseline respect between adults. But it will feel radical if you've been operating in a parent-child dynamic. That discomfort is diagnostic, not problematic. It shows you how far things have drifted from healthy. Each person owns their choices and bears the consequences. You can't genuinely respect someone you're controlling, and you can't genuinely love someone who requires your permission to exist. That's not love. That's management. That's ownership. Finally, understand this. You must be willing to walk away from arrangements that require you to abandon yourself. Not eager to walk away, not seeking reasons to leave, but willing. Without that willingness, you have no negotiating power. You've already surrendered before the conversation even begins. Boys don't need lectures about masculinity. They need models. If they watch you live as someone who has given up on himself, they learn that's what men do. If they watch you maintain authentic selfhood while loving your partner, they learn something far more valuable: how to be both connected and whole. The legacy question you need to ask yourself: what vision of masculinity are you modeling? Self-abandonment framed as maturity, or healthy boundaries framed as respect? Your choice ripples forward through generations. Make sure you're proud of that legacy. So let's bring this together. The transformation from authentic man to utility isn't inevitable. It's engineered through systematic mechanisms: the partnership myth that masks power imbalances, the financial architecture that disconnects effort from agency, the social isolation that removes external perspectives, and the constant criticism that creates external approval dependency. But here's what matters most. Understanding these mechanisms gives you power. What has been engineered can be re-engineered by men who understand the machinery and choose to opt out of the programming. You're not stuck, you're just unaware. And now you're becoming aware. This isn't about becoming selfish. It's about refusing to be reduced to a resource. It's about building relationships based on mutual respect rather than systematic use. You can be a loving partner and maintain your authentic identity. These aren't mutually exclusive despite what you've been conditioned to believe. The Stoics taught that wisdom begins with accurate perception of reality. You can't change what you won't see. Today you've seen the machinery. What you do with that awareness determines whether you continue operating as someone who has forgotten himself or reclaim your status as a free man who chooses his path. If this analysis has helped you see patterns you couldn't name before, subscribe to PsycheLens for more insights into the psychological dynamics that shape your relationships and your life. Share this with men who need to understand that their struggle isn't personal failure. It's systematic programming. Understanding the system is the first step toward changing it. And remember, the cage only has power while you don't see it. Once you see it clearly, the door has always been open. The question is, will you walk through it? Will you reclaim what you've lost? Will you remember who you are beneath all the roles you've been playing? That's up to you. That's always been up to you, and now you know it.